So thanks everybody for joining. You're very welcome to our Q2 event for the Irish chapter of Data Plus Women. It's great to see where everybody's joining from. I think I see County Cork in the chat. I see Dublin. I think we have a few Dublins today. A good few locations around Ireland and abroad. So that's great. Great. So it's great to see where everybody's joining from. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. Great. So I'll just fly through the agenda for the next hour and a half or so. So I want to first quickly cover off what Data Plus Women is all about for anybody who might be attending one of these events for the first time. So I'll just do a quick line about that. I want to cover up a bit of news, a couple updates from Tableau. And then, of course, we have our speakers. First up, we have Mary Aviles coming to us today from Michigan. So it's early in the morning for her at the moment. And then up, we've got Andrea Palala coming to us from Dublin. And then we can wrap it up with kind of an informal catch up at the end if anybody wants to stick around and have a chat at the end, some networking and that. So we'll stay on the line at the end of the session. So look, very quickly, just wanted to say a quick word, so what is Data Plus Women all about? So for anybody who's not aware or who maybe haven't joined one of these events before, there's several Data Plus Women chapters around Europe, around EMEA. So Data Plus Women is basically, we're a group that we exist to celebrate and advance the achievements of women in data. So we organize these meetups to do just that, and we provide kind of a platform to share our experiences, knowledge, and expertise. So Data Plus Women events are open to everybody, so men and women. So just to kind of call that out. So yeah, a couple updates from Tableau. They have their Tableau Live event coming up next month in May, and they're doing 3 different region-specific events. So I think there's region-specific content for each of those events. So that should be pretty cool. They put together a Know Before You Go deck, so you can take a look at that if you're interested in attending. These links I've got up on the slide at the moment. I'll share those in the chat box later on during the session. Tableau also has their newer event. It's called Data Dev Days. So that's in about a month's time in May. So this is for folks who work on the Tableau developer platform. So that's another event coming up. And then lastly, I'll just call out, there's a new version of Tableau that's out now, 2021.1. So here's a quick slide with just the highlights of what's new in the new version of Tableau. But I know that the Information Lab is doing an event, I believe it's a week from today, the 29th of April, and they're going to cover off some of the information around the new release of Tableau. So that should be a good event. So those are the highlights again. And so look, let's get on to our speakers, which is the main reason we're all here today. So first up, Mary Aviles. So Mary has managed a range of projects over the years. She's done lots of consulting with different organizations. She's worked with different sectors, retail, healthcare, nonprofit. She has extensive research experience, and she's also the managing editor for Nightingale, which Nightingale is the Journal of the Data Visualization Society. So very happy to have Mary with us today. She's going to talk to us today a bit about asking questions. So I'll give it over to you, Mary.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Katie. I'm going to share my screen here. So good luck, everyone. Let's see how that goes. And I'm going to put it in presentation view. So when I do, I won't be able to see you. So if you have a question, we're going to save questions for the end. But if something comes up, somebody just cut me off.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I'm delighted to be here. This is my first trip to Ireland, virtual or in person. I'd like to thank Katie specifically for inviting me to speak to you all today. I'm going to be talking a bit about adjacent skills, sometimes referred to as soft skills, or which I think is such an inappropriately diminutive moniker for what we're going to be talking about today. Things that can serve you both professionally and personally. My goal is to share what I hope will be a perspective on the value of both asking questions and paying attention, as well as offering techniques and resources to hone your curiosity. So, let's start this conversation in the personal. Conversations are our means of relating to others. Think about the people that you meet. A Harvard study of dating conversations, both online chats and in-person speed dates, what we call in the market research world dyads, revealed that people who demonstrate curiosity are more likable. In the online chatting pool of respondents, those who asked many questions got to know their partners better and were better liked. And the speed daters, those who asked more questions, ended up getting more dates. In fact, asking one additional question of their conversation partner meant more second dates for that inquirer. In that scenario, follow-up questions are most successful. They signal to your conversation partner that you've been listening and you've heard what they've said and that you want to know more. Plus, they're often, follow-up questions are spontaneous. If you think about it, they don't require much prep time, provided you're listening attentively. That's the personal realm, but think about the other places that we can apply these findings: job interviews, networking, industry events, waiting for Zoom calls to start, proactive outreach to the people in your outside of your immediate circle. But why is it the case that people who demonstrate curiosity are more likable? Well, as it turns out, humans like to talk about themselves. 40% of everyday speech is spent telling other people what we think or feel, basically talking about our subjective experiences. In fact, talking about ourselves, whether in person or on social media, triggers the same pleasure sensation in the brain as money or food. Self-disclosure causes increased activity in the brain's reward center. And asking questions conveys it's a powerful combination of these soft skills: empathy, curiosity, and humility. You're admitting what you don't know often gives others the chance to share their perspectives, and it can help shape your own understanding. Think about a possible application for this. Most people in their job interviews are too self-promoting. Asking questions during a job interview can help you better understand whether that job is a good fit, whether you have the skills, whether the environment's right for you, to better understand the contours of that opportunity, while at the same time, communicating to your prospective employer your desire to learn more and your inquisitive nature. Even a question like, "What am I not asking you that I should have?" Is a useful technique for gathering competitive intelligence or information about an opportunity, as well as expressing your curiosity. So when we talk about adjacent skills or soft skills, which are sometimes used interchangeably, what do we mean? In terms of skill development, we can kind of think about, if you look at this slide, the main skills are listed along the left, and adjacent skill examples are listed along the right. So what I mean is that, so for example, if you are an engineer, if that is your main skill, that's what your job is, you might choose to begin to develop an adjacent skill like project management. And we can be intentional about developing these skills. And adjacent skill development can encompass or enhance specific soft skills. So if you were to think about your own job, your own role, you might brainstorm a list of what your main skills are, the things that you are hired for. But then you might think about what skill is sort of one or two steps away from that. So for example, in my case, while I'm a qualitative market researcher mainly, that an adjacent skill that I can develop is UX research. There's many of the same characteristics. The benefits of developing adjacent skills are that you're not starting from scratch, so it should feel a little bit easier. It complements what you already know. You can develop an increased sense of empathy for your teammates or the people who are doing, for example, project management skills, because you can walk a mile in another person's shoes. You can improve your ability to communicate by picking up new lingo. It gives you sort of a fresh motivation because you're going to be working on slightly different tasks. It gives you an opportunity to identify new options because you're making connections that, from an exposure, for example, to project management that you didn't necessarily have as deeply in your engineering role. So you can make connections that others can't. And it allows you to differentiate yourself or craft new opportunities and even better evaluate prospective candidates. And a good example of adjacent skills that also incorporate curiosity and questioning comes from Humans of New York. For those of you who are not familiar, Brandon Stanton is a photographer, and he built up a really strong, I believe primarily, or started in Facebook, following a community of people by reporting out with a picture and then a person's story. And I love this quote from him. The full quote reads, "I wanted to photograph 10,000 people on the streets of New York City. I had the added goal of plotting these photos on a map." So he was going to do some mapping, some data visualization. "It seemed like the mission of a madman because I had no training as a photographer, but the impracticality of the goal served a purpose. It got me out on the street day after day, not only learning to photograph, but also to approach strangers and make them feel comfortable and engage them in conversation. Over time, these peripheral skills would be more central to Humans of New York than the photography itself." And I love that because, in fact, it has. You know, he didn't set out to become an expert interviewer, but the reason that his content is so engaging and why people, and now he does these kind of series in social media, is that he's so good at asking questions that elicit wonderful responses from people. So that's what we're talking about here today. Questions and questioning is a skill that can be honed. Think about all the value that asking questions can unlock. The asking and getting answers to questions can spur learning and idea exchange, which fuels innovation. It can improve your performance or the performance of your team. Questions build rapport, which can increase bonding among your team members, or even just, in a particular project. Asking questions can help to mitigate risk because the answers can help uncover or avoid unforeseen pitfalls. Asking questions signals engagement, and importantly, it really enhances our emotional intelligence, which is kind of a virtuous cycle because asking questions improves your emotional intelligence, which in turn makes us ask better questions, which continues to improve our emotional intelligence. There are usually two main goals when you're asking questions. Information exchange, typically for the purposes of learning in some capacity, or establishing impression, trying to get people to like you. And so framing is really critical to the effectiveness of your efforts. And when I talk about framing, I mean your objectives. What do you need to know? And what's the best way to find out? That's usually how I start every research project, as well as the setting for the questioning, the tone that you're using, and the group dynamics. So again, what's the objective of the conversation? Is it cooperative or competitive? Or maybe a little bit of both. Oftentimes it's both. I want to share throughout this conversation some techniques. So if the conversation is competitive and you're anticipating reluctance, you can start with the most sensitive questions first. That's actually, we recommend you just sort of dive in, sort of rip off the Band-Aid, if you will. Direct closed-ended questions are a good way when you're, again, anticipating reluctance and you're in sort of a conflicted or competitive environment. You should phrase the questions in that case so that it's easy for someone to respond in the affirmative. What do I mean? If you think, for example, that a supplier is going to miss a delivery date, you might ask, "So it looks like you're going to miss the deadline," right? Conversely, because in a tense environment, a closed-ended question works better because it doesn't allow for much wiggle room. People are less likely to lie, as it turns out, when you make a pessimistic assumption, which seems counterintuitive. Closed-ended questions tend to be the kind of questions that we ask in a quantitative setting, meaning, so for example, a quantitative question is, how much money are people spending on dining during COVID? Now, conversely, if your conversation environment is cooperative, but even if you anticipate some avoidance or the topics are going to be tricky, you should start with the least sensitive questions first so that you can build rapport. In that case, you can use open-ended questions to draw people out. And again, you can use negative assumptions to help frame tough questions. Open-ended questions tend to reveal unexpected answers. They fuel idea generation. And they tend to be qualitative in nature. For example, how do people decide what to have for dinner during COVID? That's where I spend most of my time in qualitative questions. In terms of tone, casual questioning tends to work in either situation better than a formal tone. And in either situation, people tend to be more responsive if you give them an out when you're framing the question-oriented conversation. For example, when I start a research engagement or an interview session, I usually say, I'm asking for your perspective. There are no right or wrong answers. You can change your answers at any time. And it's important to think about the fact that groups, I talked about dyads in that early slide, right? A date is essentially a dyad, right? It's two people. Or, it could be a one-on-one. Triad would be three people. But groups, asking questions in group settings is very different. Think about a meeting or a focus group. In a case where you have a group of people and one person is quiet, and sitting with their arms crossed or very closed, that person can derail the entire session, which is why sometimes you need to bring sort of a skilled facilitator along with you to help to move that person into, engage them in the conversation so they don't take everything offline. But what happens if you're introverted? Oh, hang on just a second. My slide is not advancing. Hold, please. Okay, but what happens if you're introverted and you're not gregarious and you don't want to sort of run out and just pepper the world with your questions? There are ways to develop your questioning capabilities internally or by yourself. You may need a little more prep time. There's a technique called question formulation technique, or QFT, and you can use this technique to interview candidates, evaluate prospective service providers, even develop a podcast interview. And basically, it's a 4-step process. There's a book, a pamphlet that goes along with it, which I'll share a little bit about at the end. But first, you sit yourself down and you think about a list of questions, and you develop just a running list of questions just with no editing. Then you begin to categorize those questions into closed-end versus open-ended, as we talked about before. And then you think about how do you plan to use each question, and if necessary, you might change. Oftentimes, you'll find yourself changing a closed question, which is a very binary sort of yes/no or metric-oriented question, into an open-ended question. And then you begin to prioritize your questions in terms of, again, what do you need to know? What will you do with the information you collect? What answers will have the greatest impact, and how much time do you have to get the information that you need? Active reading. So again, you don't even have to practice questioning with other people. You can develop questioning techniques with yourself by doing active reading. That can build your questioning muscles. A couple of ways to think about that. You can ask yourself pre-reading questions. When you sit down with a book, what do I already know about this topic? Why am I assigning myself this book, or why was I assigned this book in a class or on a project? You can summarize the text that you just read by writing questions in the margin. At the end of each paragraph, you can practice asking yourself questions like, what did this paragraph say? Or what did I learn from this paragraph? And at the end of reading anything, you can write yourself exam questions. So those are ways to sort of build your questioning capabilities all by yourself without involving anyone else to start with. If you're an introvert and you're ready to sort of put your toe in the water and we ever get out of lockdown, at the next in-person event you go to, you could think about picking someone out in a room who looks uncomfortable. Load yourself up with 2 or 3 questions with this, using the question formulation technique, and go rescue that person by, engaging with just that one person with a few of the questions that you brought along with you. And when we talk about setting, in terms of setting the right approach, and again, if you're anticipating it being a difficult conversation, an example I like to use is think about talking to your kids, if you have kids, about something that's tricky, or something where you anticipate some flack from them. It can be very effective to ask them questions in the car. When they're either sitting next to you in the front seat or behind you in the back seat, and you're not face to face with them. When you're not in a face to face setting with someone, oftentimes they're more comfortable sharing information. You can use the phone too. I know in this age of Zoom, we often forget about the phone, but you can hear people smile in their voice. They can be more at ease and less self-conscious when you're talking to people. If you do a phone call, oftentimes that can be more effective than a Zoom call for particular questioning. People are often more comfortable talking about tough topics, and you might find it's less distracting to talk on the phone as well. However, I'll point out that it's much more effective typically to do questioning face to face, because in an in-person conversation, and I mean face to face either in Zoom or on the phone live versus in writing or in text, because in an in-person conversation you can make mistakes and correct them in a way that's more complicated in email or text. And I'll point out, to quote Depeche Mode, you should enjoy the silence. I know that there's this notion of the awkward silence, but silence can be extremely useful during conversation to await the answer to a question. It's a gift. It really is. It can mean that the person is still processing. And so you should really avoid, I know as much as it's really hard, the inclination to interrupt or move on too quickly. Sharing silence can be another mechanism for reinforcing rapport with people. And it can create space that can really change the tenor of the conversation. In technique, think about if the answer that you receive to a question is something like, I don't know how I feel about that. You could follow up with a simple because with an implied question mark at the end. It invites a person to finish their thought. And sometimes, especially in a difficult conversation, you sometimes need to use silence to let the person simmer down and diffuse. So silence can be a gift. We've been talking up until now about asking questions, but you're also, this other half of this conversation is listening. Active listening can be transformative. And the documentary filmmaker Valerie Kaur says, we risk being changed by what we hear. And I've been thinking about that, and a technique that I read about last week that I've been just beginning to try is, again, something you can practice within yourself. Being aware of when you're about to make a judgment, either verbally or mentally, and instead ask a question. So there's a technique that I've just read about that I think is really interesting in terms of the transformative nature of listening. Giving someone a chance to speak without interruption is a gift. It requires patience and self-discipline. We are always listening to the thoughts in our own heads, and active listening requires that you silence those thoughts, which can be very challenging and does require discipline. You've all heard, I'm sure, the reflexive listening technique of repeating back a bit of what someone just said in follow-up so that you can show you're listening. And that practice can be awkward and seem overly, ridiculous in some ways, but the practice gives the person a chance to really clarify or to correct what they've said, and it reinforces that you understood what they were trying to say. So listening actively can really change a narrative. I love this quote too, Rob Walker. This book is a book I give away all the time. It's absolutely delightful, and just all kinds of good techniques in it. Real quick, easy read. Rob Walker is a journalist and an author, and he says, there's a larger quote, that there's always at least a moment when I miss the chance to pursue or even step on or get in the way of a source's smart point or original observation by rushing to or trying to make my own point. This is a failure of attention on my part and a failure of humility too. And he says one of the wince-inducing rituals of his job when he's transcribing interviews is listening to himself fail to listen. I feel the same way. I transcribe my interviews all the time, and when I have the opportunity to practice active listening in my daily work, when I cut someone off, it's usually due to one of four things. One, I'm worried about the time running over. And in that case, I should have probably set the time more appropriately. Two, I'm excited to add in something related to the point. And so I don't want to forget it. And so while that can reinforce rapport, not typically if I interrupt the person or I distract them from, a gem they were just about to give me. And three, I might interrupt if I think I know what they're going to say, but how would I know, really? And four, sometimes unconsciously, I'm just trying to show off, and not on purpose. It just sometimes happens. So look for low stakes opportunities in your daily life, like in phone calls with your family or in conversation with your kids, or in casual coworker interaction to just practice this. Negotiating a deal navigating conflict is listening is foundational in order for that negotiation to be productive. And it's a skill that requires training because giving someone else the benefit of the doubt is counterinstinctual. The best strategy for persuasion is to listen and learn. So there's sort of 5 things to think about in a negotiation. You need to gain insight into the other person's position, and a way to do that is via questioning in order to understand their perspective. That's called exercising your second position skills. Asking questions and listening to the answer in negotiation helps you to see what's fueling feelings, what a person cares about, how much risk they're willing to tolerate. And it's important for you to approach this from a what matters to them, not a what matters to you. Listen for the feelings that are coming up in the conversation, and you can name them using that reflexive listening techniques, or you can share how you're feeling. Perhaps you're in a conference in a conference room with a bunch of team members and you've been hashing over things. It's not wrong to say, I am frustrated. Here's why, right? If the conversation feels difficult to you, if you're in a conversation and it's feeling horrible, it's likely signaling something about you. You're feeling wronged by the discussion, you're reacting to the person in the discussion or the people, or the content is in some way threatening your identity, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So again, you have to think about your mindset, shifting from your objective or your agenda from getting an apology or advancing your own agenda to instead obtaining a better understanding of what's going on, which may prolong what you think about as the timeline in that negotiation, but will ultimately result in more productivity. If you need help figuring out what are your identity triggers, we talked about your identity, try asking yourself this fill-in-the-blank question before you go into one of these conversations. If I know nothing else about myself, I know that I am a blank person. So for me, it might be something like, I know that I'm a detail-oriented person. And so if the feedback that I'm getting is that I was too in the weeds or that I was too detail-oriented, that might cause me to get kind of riled. Building and maintaining this negotiation skill abilities comes from your ability to see someone else's point of view, to take responsibility if you've contributed in a conflict situation, owning your part, apologizing if necessary, and showing that you're willing to work to fix it. This is called joint contribution, and it comes from active listening. Understanding the choices that we made to get to where we are and helping to identify what we changed. These are recommendations from Sheila Heen, who is a New York Times bestselling author, and we'll talk about her book a little bit at the end. So many of us on the call here are involved in data analysis, but we can't analyze what questions we didn't think to ask. Asking questions is a form of data collection. That's what I do all day long. Most of what we've discussed so far are qualitative lines of questioning, and qualitative inquiry produces unstructured data. The alternative approach, of course, is quantitative inquiry. For example, sending out a survey, those results are structured data. They can fit neatly into a spreadsheet. So interestingly, Harvard Business did a study, and in that study, clients or customers and manager priorities only coincided about 50% of the time. And in quantitative studies, surveys tend to be based on what managers think clients want. But if they don't know, then you can see 50% of the time, you can see where the problem lies. And this error can be compounded in studies like rankings because, for example, if a question asks you to rank requirements based on usage, if you don't use the functionality, but you still care about it because your assistant does, right? You may rank those questions differently, but if we didn't know that your assistant used it and you didn't, right? Because you can see where the problem comes from. Interestingly, a lot of folks think that quantitative research is more efficient and cleaner to conduct, but qualitative methods are very conducive to identifying faulty assumptions and prospective pitfalls like we've talked about earlier. You need both. Organizations, interestingly, though, are frequently surprised by how few customer or stakeholder interviews it takes to get actionable insights. Oftentimes, saturation on a particular topic occurs after only 18 to 20 interviews. Generative or exploratory steps done through qualitative work can help to reduce opportunities for questions you didn't think to ask in quantitative data analysis. Asking for feedback is a completely different kind of questioning, and receiving feedback is a different kind of listening. in a study from Heen and Stone, who are the authors of Difficult Conversation, which a book we'll talk about in a minute, 36%, only 36% of managers complete appraisals thoroughly and on time. More than half, 55% of employees say their reviews are unfair and inaccurate. 25% of folks, 1 in 4, dread evaluations in work more than anything else in their working lives. And 63% of HR executives surveyed said their managers were unwilling or unable to have difficult conversations. But we know, much like that first slide about the dating conversation, people who seek critical feedback tend to receive higher performance ratings for the reasons we've already addressed, right? They're communicating humility and a desire for excellence. So there's, again, like we talked about in that negotiation conversation, know your tendencies when you're receiving feedback and your triggers, right? Do you feel wronged by the conversation? Are you reacting to the person who's giving you feedback? Or is the content threatening your identity? Separate the what from the who. Lean toward coaching, right? If there's evaluative feedback and then there's coaching feedback. Orient your mindset to hear what could be considered valuable advice. Unpack the feedback. If you have to, ask for clarification or validate the feedback through use of a loving critic, which is someone who cares about you and who has your best interests in mind, but will also answer you honestly. That's a term from Dr. Tasha Eurich, who is an organizational psychologist and keynote speaker. You might try asking for feedback for just one thing. What one thing could I do differently? Another way, Adam Grant, another organizational psychologist and best-selling author, recommends when you're asking for feedback, ask it 2 ways. Ask for feedback on a 1 to 10 scale, and because no one will ever say 10, and it's true they don't. But then you follow up with how can I get closer to 10, and that motivates the person to kind of go into coaching mode, and it motivates you to be in receiving feedback mode. And then finally, another thing is, if especially for this audience, if you regularly find yourself delivering high visibility feedback, and I could see this like maybe in a dashboard design presentation, if you frequently get caught off guard by questions from the audience, you might try sending out a regular email in advance of that meeting to collect questions in advance so that you can avoid being caught off guard. Prioritizing skills in an organization, questioning and answering skills, can really promote a culture of learning. And organizations that learn rapidly and apply what they've learned survive and thrive. Again, it's counterintuitive for a leader to feel like they worry that if they show people they don't know everything, that they'll seem like they're not worth leading. But in fact, the opposite is true. A leader who asks inspiring questions instills trust, which is especially important right now, right? When so much is up in the air. An inspiring question might be something like, where do we have the opportunity to deliver more value to our stakeholders than we had in the past? There's a great story about Domino's, which is a pizza chain here in the United States. They had received a bunch of customer satisfaction feedback that their pizza didn't taste well. So instead of sort of keeping that to themselves, they announced those findings, and then they worked in public and shared feedback about what they were doing and asked for feedback about what they could do better. And they were very public about that. And that's how they addressed the taste. And in that approach, that technique, it was critical that they shared the answers that they received. They asked people, like, what could they do better? And they shared the answers they received as soon as they came in, to show that they're listening, but also to continue to conduct that idea generation. Another way to think about this is, we often talk about brainstorming ideas, but that establishes a competitive environment. Instead, we could brainstorm questions and involve a multidisciplinary stakeholder team. So we get multiple perspectives, and that sets up a collaborative environment. And then you can rank the questions in order of what's potentially most impactful. And finally, we've been talking a lot about sort of professional and personal application. You can sort of build your own personal culture of learning too. Business consultant John Hagel talks about opportunity narratives as these big, inspiring opportunities out in the future that can only be achieved if people come together to address them. And it's a powerful call to action. But that starts internally with one person, right? And so for self-exploration, you could develop a category of questions for you to explore internally, to reflect on internally. An example that I saw on Marami Kaba's site was questions to ask yourself when you're outraged by injustice. Timely topic. And she recommends 4 questions to ask yourself. Number 1, what resources exist so I can better educate myself? Number 2, who's already doing work around this injustice? Number 3, do I have the capacity to offer concrete support and help? And number 4, how could I be constructive? And that's just one example of sort of a topic for self-exploration. I mentioned a bunch of sources, and I can follow up with Katie and provide a list of all the sources that I referenced. Here are a few of the books that I referenced and sources. SCIP is the Society for Competitive Intelligence Professionals. The Knowledge Project is a podcast, but a short list of my favorite resources for additional learning. If you listen to podcasts, pay close attention to the questions the hosts ask. There's a writer, author of Winners Take All, Anand Giridharadas. He has a newsletter called The Ink, and it's in an interview format, and I subscribe to that and read that. That's a great example of questions and answers. Another source is we talked about Rob Walker's book, The Art of Noticing, early on. He has an Icebreaker of the Week, a collection of questions that people submit that he maintains, which I love. And finally, thank you for having me. In addition to the abundance of the applications we've discussed related to questions in our professional lives, like job interviews and networking, honing our curiosity exercises a growth mindset, and it really provides daily opportunities for learning, joy, and transformation, which I feel like we could all use a little more of. If you get a chance in the next week or so, I would sure appreciate, I'm practicing what I preach. Please share your evaluation with me. What is one thing I could have done better or differently during this presentation today to make it more useful to you? And with that, I will stop my share here. And
That's great. Thank you so much, Mary.
Sure thing.
Yeah, geez, that's some really cool material. I really enjoyed that. I know we have one question here, a specific question. What was the name of the website for asking questions when we are outraged?
Oh, so that is, the woman's name is Mariama Kaba. So it looks like Maria Me, KABA.com, but I'll send you the link, Katie, and you could maybe, I'll put a list of links together and perhaps you could share them with the audience.
Perfect. Yeah, that's no problem. Okay. What we might do in the interest of time, it's about 2:15 here. Another comment coming in. Many thanks, Mary. Very helpful talk, some useful tips, especially for those of us who like to ask questions. So I know, speaking of questions, can we take 1 or 2 questions now from anybody else if they want to put them into the chat? Was there any other? Let me just take a quick scroll in case anything slipped in. Okay. What we might do is we might carry on with Andrea, just in the interest of time, because I know people are in the middle of their workday, and we can certainly, if there's any other questions that come to mind, we can take them at the end. So, and I think Louise, I can throw my slide up here. I think you were going to, oh great, Mary, you just popped that into the chat there, that's great. Let me go ahead. I think Louise, you wanted to next.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks so much, Mary. I've written a whole page of notes on all of that, with lots of interesting terms, and yeah, it was really, really thought-provoking. So thanks so much for that. Next up, we're delighted to have Andrea Palella. So Andrea will tell you more herself, but she's digital lead in PwC Ireland. And she was recently nominated as part of the Women Who Lead initiative at PwC. So we're delighted to have her. So I'll pass over to you, Andrea, and you to share your screen then.
Thanks a mil, Louise, and hi everyone, and thanks Mary for a really interesting presentation. I know I wrote down a couple of things in particular, which is more questions equal more dates. So that's one to file away, and people love to talk about themselves. That's no surprise at all, and one worth remembering. So somebody pointed out to me recently, actually, that every time somebody shares their screen, they say, I'm going to share my screen. It's almost as if we have this belief that if we don't say it, it won't actually happen. So I find myself still saying it. And every time I think I'm going to try one day to do that without saying it. So I have shared my screen. Hopefully you guys can see it. And before we kick off properly, just to say, for the first time today in a very long time, I'm wearing actual normal outside clothes. So I feel like I've lived my life these past months and probably this past year in hoodies and loungewear, which is glorified pajamas, to be honest. But I said today, since I'm talking to you lovely people, I'd actually wear some outside clothes. So if I look uncomfortable at any point, that's probably the reason why I've gotten so used to hoodies and loungewear that this feels a little bit strange. So who am I and why am I here to talk to you guys today? So as Louise said, I'm Andrea Palella. I'm from PwC in Ireland, where I lead out on digital transformation. And what I want to talk to you about today, and honestly, I could talk all day about the topic of digital transformation. It's my absolute passion, but we have very little time. So I'm going to try and just bring you really my own personal perspective on it. So the main message I want to get across is that digital transformation is about people, not technology. That can sound really, really trite. And you often say that and people look at you and think, well, what does that mean, Andrea? What do you mean when you say that? And what I'm going to try and do today is share with you my story of the digital transformation at PwC. And I very much guarantee you that if you were to have the same conversation with my boss, with anybody from my team, or with anybody from PwC, they absolutely would tell you a story of digital transformation, but it would be a different one because it's a very personal thing and it's all about the individual and the person. So today I'm going to talk to you about my perspective on that digital transformation. I'll start by telling you about my journey. So I'm a non-tech person by background and how I came to be in the role that I'm in. I'll talk to you then a little bit about what we actually have done so far in PwC in terms of that digital transformation, what it's looked and felt like. And then I'm going to talk to you about some key takeaways, where I think all of this is going to next. And then happy to take any questions that come up in the chat at the end of the presentation. So to start with, I'll start with my journey. So I studied business and law in college, so not tech at all. I started work in PwC more years ago than I care to admit because it ages me. So started working in PwC straight out of college into the tax team there. So for those of you who don't know, PwC is a really big accountancy firm, one of the big four accountancy firms. One of the areas in there is tax, and I worked as a tax consultant in the private client team, giving tax advice to really wealthy people. So everything from estate planning to structuring foreign property acquisitions, all of that kind of stuff. So did that for a really long time, and then felt like I wanted to do something a little bit different, probably back around 2015. And I took on a role, it's probably best described as a people engagement role within the tax business in PwC in Ireland. So it's a business of about 600 people. And I work directly with the head of tax there, who's a guy called Joe Tynan, all around people engagement initiatives across PwC in Ireland. So very people focused and very much about how people felt about the work they did and that kind of thing. Really enjoyed that role. And while I was doing that role, my boss, Joe, had gone off to New York for a global PwC conference, and he'd seen a presentation on data analytics as it related to tax. He came back from that presentation really excited, pulled me into his office and said, Andrea, I've seen this thing, I think it might be good for us here in Ireland. And he described it as a light touch project that we might roll out here in PwC in Ireland. So I took it and ran with it. And as part of putting together the program we were going to deliver in tax, I started having conversations with people who were in this space. So there's a guy I worked with and on the team locally who was very much into tax technology, and then some teams around EMEA and globally. And the first demo I saw of an actual visualization tool absolutely blew me away. It was a real wow moment for me. And the reason it was such a wow moment was, and it's going to sound really dull to people who aren't tax people, but it was about expenses. So it's all about expenses from this particular organization. And one of the things we're always trying to do as tax advisors is make sure that in the area of expenses, we're managing fraud and all of that good stuff. So the expenses they were looking at were things like mileage. And when people claim for mileage, they basically tell you, I drove from here to there, you have to pay me X amount per kilometer. There's no real evidence that they did it. You're kind of trusting people to claim the right amounts. So you have to be careful that things are genuine, and if the tax authorities were to look at them, they would all stack up. So one of the things they looked at in this visualization was they looked at where people were claiming mileage, and they connected that to where people were claiming for parking tickets. So for actual parking in different parking facilities. So typically you don't get one without the other, and parking requires a receipt to claim the cost, where mileage doesn't. So what they were able to do was spot anywhere where somebody had claimed mileage but not parking, and that would raise a red flag, and they'd look at those claims in more detail. So I thought this was amazing in terms of how it enabled you to hone into those particular potential red flags and challenges. And I just thought this was fantastic and was the future. I remember around that time I went to a conference in Madrid, and it was all about data analytics and how it fit with the tax business. Can't even remember the topic of what the guys were talking to us about, but I do remember coming outside of the room and saying to a friend of mine who was there with me that this is the future of PwC, of where we're going with work, and this is the future of my career. This is what I want to do, absolutely, have no doubt about it. And she kind of looked at me and was like, yeah, okay, Andrea, grand. We went off back to Dublin, and I went in and had a conversation with one of the other partners I worked for, really, really strategic guy, very forward looking in PwC, very much had his finger on the pulse. And I said to him, I think this is the future of my career. I think this is the direction PwC is going to go in. And honestly, he looked at me and kind of said, no, Andrea, no, you need to think of something else. This is not where we're going. I don't think you're right. I didn't listen, as I tend not to, because I just knew in my gut that this was the right thing, and this was ultimately where our business would go. But what I realized was not everybody else knew that yet. They needed to have their own wow moment. They needed to feel it for themselves. And that's what I set about trying to do within the tax business. So we started building a program in tax around data analytics academies. So these were all about introducing people to the ideas of these different technologies, to how you could innovate within your role. And it was really just about empowering our people to be able to solve their own problems. So we started running those programs. And after the first one, we ran this showcase event that basically was kind of like a glorified speed dating, is the way I would put it. So we had all these teams who'd been and done this training. They built apps and tools that were either kind of internally focused or client focused, using these tools to harness their data and get insights and all that good stuff. And then they demoed those at these different pods. And then Joe and the rest of the leadership team from tax went around the pods and heard the stories and that kind of thing. Now, in fairness, Joe was very bought into digital at this point. It was him who gave me this project in the first place. So he was behind it, but he hadn't quite had that wow moment yet. And I don't think he fully saw at that time that this was the future. And I distinctly remember him talking to me after that event. And what he said to me was, he said, Andrea, I expected to be impressed by what I saw today, but I didn't expect to be this impressed. He was absolutely blown away by what some really, really junior people had done. So they built these amazing apps that had huge potential to really impact their business. And then these really junior people and some partners and directors were presenting this back to the leadership team. So he was really bought into it, and we started to really build some momentum up in tax. So we started to roll out all of these academies and these skills across the tax business, and that started to get noticed. So that's what was happening in my life and my little bubble in PwC in tax. So meanwhile, what was happening in the wider world? So probably just worth noting at this point what PwC is like as an organization. So for those of you who aren't familiar, it's an accountancy firm. The Irish firm is about 3,500 people. We have a whole team of people who work on tax advice, tax consulting. We have a whole piece of our business that's focused on audit, which is a heavily, heavily regulated sector. And then we have a group that work in advisory and consulting. So lots of different business services. By nature, we're quite conservative. We have to be. Everything is regulated. It's really, really important that our clients trust and believe in us. We're also a bunch of accountants. So we're never going to be the most innovative, exciting, cutting edge type of firm, or at least we certainly weren't back in those days. So that was the kind of environment we were working in. So while we were doing all this cool kind of stuff in tax, the other thing probably, like, that's where PwC was at. There was other stuff going on at the time as well. So I would say PwC in Ireland as a whole had started to build the ecosystems needed for digital and technology. So we'd moved to the cloud and we'd started introducing all these different platforms. So we were building the infrastructure for a digital transformation, but we hadn't quite made that leap yet. PwC globally had started looking at this across all of our firms, but they were looking at it more for the bigger territories. So typically in our organization, when things happen at a global level, it's the US, the UK, the bigger territories that lead the way, and then places like Ireland kind of follow along afterwards. So that was happening at a global level as well. Probably worth thinking a little bit at this stage, what was happening in the world at that time, and how were people experiencing tech and digital in the real world? And this is something I like to talk to people about quite a lot when I'm trying to relate to people who don't see why digital is important and why they need to think about it. I talk to people about what's your day-to-day life like outside of work. Great example of that I always think is Netflix. So lots of us have Netflix and we watch shows on Netflix. You think about how Netflix works and what it does and how it harnesses your data and it uses the algorithms and that kind of thing. So when I go into Netflix, it knows what type of shows it should recommend to me. So it recommended that I watch Bridgerton. Great recommendation, absolutely the type of thing I enjoy. Highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't watched it yet. So it does simple things like that, figures out what you might like, puts it right in front of you. Other things it does when you're watching a show, it skips directly to the next episode past the credits. So you're more likely to binge watch and then keep watching shows and keep engaging. Those are the simple things that we're all aware of. There's more nuanced things that they do as well. So for example, if you share your Netflix account with your other half, if you log in through your portal and they log in through theirs, what you will see is different and is tailored to each of you. So for example, if you're someone who really likes action and you watch a lot of action movies, that kind of thing, the clips Netflix will show you from particular shows, even the screen grabs they'll show you will be tailored to the more action orientated pieces. Even goes so far as if you get the Friends screen grabs, if you're a guy, it's more likely to show you the male characters, and if you're a woman, it's more likely to show you the female ones. All of this stuff that's happening that we're not even aware of, what actually really helps with our experience of that platform. Nobody is wowed by that. I'm sure there's nobody here kind of going, oh yeah, wow, Netflix knows what you want to watch, because we're all just used to it. This is how we operate in our normal lives. Another great example I always think is Just Eat. So any of those kind of apps on your phone where you go in and it will gather all the data for you. So it knows your local Indian, your local Chinese, your local chippy. It remembers what you ordered the last time. It remembers your address and it remembers your credit card details. So a couple of taps and your takeaway is on the way before you can regret breaking your diet for the 5th time this week. So that's just how technology operates in our normal day-to-day lives. We take it completely for granted. If you flip that around and think, when you then come into an organization like PwC and like lots of other organizations and how we operate and how we serve our people and our clients, that's not what it felt like back then. So if you think about from a client's perspective, we would quite often do a 60-page report and then PDF it and send it to a client. So some poor client is on the way to the airport, back when airports were a thing, hopefully they will be again soon, and they're trying to download this thing on their phone and read it, and they know by the time they read it, the interest rate they're looking at has changed, or the deal they're looking at has slightly changed, so it's already out of date even before they've looked at it. So how we were interacting and how we were sharing things with our clients wasn't keeping pace with what was happening in the outside world. So what we found in PwC, and they found this globally and locally in Ireland, was that our clients wanted insights to help them make the right decisions at the right time. So our clients wanted us to give them a different type of service. Our people also wanted a better experience. So we hire really bright, really talented people. And quite often those people can spend a lot of their early years doing quite mundane tasks, like matching up ledgers and all of that kind of stuff, and a lot of stuff that's quite manual. They wanted a better work experience, but they also wanted to learn the skills for the workforce of the future. We've lots of digital natives in our business because we hire graduates every single year, but there's also people across all age ranges that are really interested in building these skills. So our people wanted it too. And then when we look to our leaders, so our partners and directors who are engaging with clients the whole time, they wanted to be able to talk about digital with confidence. They wanted to be able to answer their clients' questions about what was happening in digital transformation, but they also wanted to be comfortable when somebody in their organization and our organization came to them with an idea about how we might use a piece of technology to solve a problem. They didn't want to look like an idiot. They wanted to feel like they knew how this fit together and what it could do. So all of this kind of was happening at the same time. And what happened was back in 2019, so Fergal O'Rourke is the head of the whole Irish firm, had seen what was happening globally, even though it was geared more towards the larger territories, kind of looked at what we did in tax and saw the momentum that we were building, And he decided that he was going to make digital transformation one of the cornerstones of the PwC strategy. So suddenly digital became part of our strategy. It was written into everything, and he set up a team. So he decided to create the role of the first ever head of digital for PwC. And he gave that role to Joe Tynan, who was head of tax, because of all the work we'd done in tax. So Joe took on that role, tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to come and join this newly created team that was going to drive digital transformation for the whole of PwC in Ireland. Now, what I will say here, it's a little bit of careful what you wish for, because after Madrid, I told everyone this was going to be my career, this was going to be my job, this was the future. And now suddenly it was. And to be honest, it was a bit of a holy crap kind of moment, because I'm not sure at that point I knew how to do it. I kind of thought I did, or I thought I might, but suddenly being given a blank page, a team, and then this whole focus of digital transformation, I'm not going to lie, was pretty damn scary. So where did we go from there, and what did we do, and how did the story unfold? So what you can see on the screen there is our digital transformation strategy within PwC in Ireland. It's really well formulated, really well honed, very easy to understand, makes absolute sense, and it is exactly what we did. I'd love to be able to tell you that we started with this strategy and then we just implemented it, but I'll let you into a little secret. We absolutely had no strategy when we first started out. We knew what we wanted to do and where we wanted to get to. We had good instincts in terms of how we wanted to get there, but we very much just had a blank page. And I would say in my team, we lived this strategy before we ever were able to commit it to paper. So this absolutely describes what we did and how we did it. I just don't think we knew it at the time. So at the beginning of our program back in 2019, one of the things we decided to focus on in terms of upskilling our people was we set this goal for ourselves to put 90% of our people through a digital academy in the first 2 years of our program. And I was given responsibility for designing and delivering that program. So that was quite scary and quite a lot to do. Our team was brand new. I didn't even know the people I was working with. So we were trying to get up and running. So the team kicked off in July. And then we kind of hit our first and a scary road bump. So we were talking about doing those academies, and I kind of knew what we'd done in tax and what that might look like and what we were trying to achieve. But then what happened was people from our audit business came and spoke to us. And what they said was, look, our busy season is kicking in from September. If you don't roll out these academies before then, all of our people aren't going to be able to go until next year. So very quickly, we had this really stark choice between, okay, well, do we build a perfect academy model? Do we make sure we've ticked all the boxes and thought it all through and make it all look really pretty and perfect, and miss out on this part of the business that could hugely benefit from the tools we're introducing and wait until next year? Or do we actually live our values and live that agile mindset and just not let perfect be the enemy of good? So we decided to throw caution to the wind. And I said, okay, look, if you guys want academies, we're not quite ready, but we'll deliver academies as you need them. So very quickly, we found we'd signed up to delivering academies for a huge bunch of audit people. And we'd a couple of weeks, I think, in the end to prepare and get ready. I genuinely remember the fear of that from a personal perspective, because what I felt, and this is when the penny really dropped for me, when I was in tax, the reason I felt I was really good at my role in digital transformation was because I knew tax. I knew tax people. I could stand up at the top of that room and confidently look at everyone in there and say, I can do your job. And that gave me huge confidence in that I understood the business and what it could do. I also understood the technology and how all those pieces fit together. Suddenly, I found myself standing at the top of the room with a bunch of people from assurance and wealth management in the audit business. And I do not have a clue what those guys do. I do not know what they do. And I remember getting ready to stand at the top of the room and thinking, what am I doing here? Like, how am I going to talk to these people? I don't know what it is they do. Why am I the person who's leading this? And how does this all fit together and all make sense? And when I stepped back from it and thought about it, what I realized was that I don't need to be an expert in AWM. I have a room full of experts. What I am an expert in is people. I'm really good at working with people and helping people understand what problems they're facing and helping them to have that light bulb moment where they get truly excited about digital and what it can do. And all you need to do, and it goes back to a lot of things that Mary said, if you listen and ask the right questions, you can make a huge impact with people. So what we did in the academies, and I'd say for me, that's probably the moment when I realized it is about people and not technology or not even business knowledge. So something I saw recently on LinkedIn that really struck me in terms of helping people solve their own problems and how to look at problems, it was a quote that said, people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill. People want a 1/4-inch hole. And I thought that was really, really an interesting way of looking at it, because you have to come at it from the perspective of the problem you're trying to solve and not the tool that will solve that problem. And in that case, a 1/4-inch drill is going to get you a 1/4-inch hole, but there's a nuance there that you need to think about. And the example that springs to my mind when I think about that, and I've talked about this a lot in our academies, is the Channel Tunnel. So there's a really good example with the Channel Tunnel going way back years ago. So for the Eurostar, which is the high-speed train that goes from London to Paris and to Brussels, and they were getting lots of complaints from their business travelers. And it seemed like those complaints were about the trains taking too long. So it just took too long and all that kind of stuff. Very easy to look at that feedback and think, okay, well, what do we need to do? We need to make faster trains. To make those trains faster, even by 5 minutes, is a €1 billion operation. So it's a lot of money to make a small difference. But when they started asking more questions of their travelers and tried to get to the bottom of it, what they realized was it wasn't the length of the journey that was the issue. It was the dead time that was the issue. So these are business travelers. And what they were finding was when they were on the train, there was either no Wi-Fi or the Wi-Fi wasn't strong enough. And when they were waiting to get the train, there was nowhere to sit and do their work. So what they actually introduced as a solution instead, which cost significantly less than making speedier trains, was they introduced high-speed, much more reliable Wi-Fi on all of their trains. And then they also introduced a business lounge where you could sit and comfortably work, and the complaints completely disappeared. So sometimes it's thinking about the problem that you want to solve and not about the tool that you need to solve. So in that case, they didn't need an expert in high-speed trains. What they actually needed was better Wi-Fi. So if you take that back to some of the examples that we see, and I always think stories are really powerful. In terms of people I've spoken to as we've gone through our academies, I try and really focus on what are their pain points. And I will never get somebody from our business come up to me and say, Andrea, I need a data visualization tool so that I can share this insight with my client. What that person will say to me is, you know, I share these reports with my clients, they're really static. I need something more dynamic so that the conversations with the client are better and more interactive. The solution is the same. And when we talk about it, we'll figure out that actually it's a visualization tool that you need. But the problem in their minds is about their relationship with the client and how they share that information. Another one that I always found interesting was if you talk to some of our junior people in the really busy parts of our business, they might say to you, well, actually, Andrea, you know what the worst thing is for me? On a Thursday night, all my mates from the intake are going off to Dicey's at 6 or 7 o'clock, back when Dicey's and pubs and all that good stuff were a thing. So I'm stuck at my desk and I'm trying to match over these things across Excel, and it's taking forever and I have to do this every week, and I'm missing out on all this time with my friends. Or someone might want to get out of the office and go play football, or they might want to go and pick up their kids and they're stuck late because they're doing this manual process. So in their heads, that's what their problem is. They're missing out on things and they want to be able to do those things. So they're not going to come to me and say, Andrea, I need a data prep tool that's going to speed up this process. What they would say to me is, I'm really fed up being in the office late. Here's what I do for work, and then I'll help them figure out what the solution is from there. So I think that's a really, really important way of looking at it, because people care a hell of a lot more about their problems than they ever will about your solutions. And if you can help them figure out what their problems are, and even better, give them the skills and the tools to solve those problems, they'll probably never remember that you did that because they'll genuinely think they did it for themselves. But that's when you've really empowered your people, and that's what will make a huge difference to your business. So it's just a bit of a snapshot of what our academies look like and how we embrace these different behaviors that you can see on the screen. So what did that look like then in terms of the problems we talked about earlier, and how did that address the issues that we had? So I always think stories are really, really powerful. So 3 quick stories that I'll share here that cover each one of these. So in terms of our clients that want better insights, really great example of that came from some of our tax colleagues. Was a client that they used to meet every single year, and they do this big meeting, they do this really detailed, really boring report. They send it to the client, and they'd all sit in this huge big boardroom, client at one end, PwC people at the other, and they'd go through this report, and everyone would get really bored, but they'd go through it and they'd work through it. 1 year they decided to actually use a visualization tool to present the data in a much more dynamic, interactive way. Same boardroom, they're sitting at opposite ends, they threw it up on the screen. And what they found was when the client saw this, the client started asking questions like, oh, if you change that right there, what does that look like? And if I just look at this sector of my business, what impact does that have over here? And they said, and I love the way they told this story, that slowly but surely the client inched down, so from their side of the boardroom table, and then suddenly they're sitting beside the PwC person and they're almost nudging them out of the way, trying to get on the laptop and can I click this and can I click that? So you have this much more engaged conversation. So that was a really powerful story. Another one that always sticks with me from my time in tax in the early days of doing this work is a girl called Christine, who was a brand new joiner to our tax business when we did our first academy. So Christine doesn't even come from a business background, never mind a tech background. Her background is in music. She got the opportunity to go to an academy as part of the transfer pricing team, and she learned about it was visualization tools we focused on then. She built this visualization for a client, and her team went and spoke to this client, this CFO, about what they'd done. And because Christine was the one who built this dashboard, she ended up doing quite a bit of the talking. So that will be very unusual in our business for someone at associate level to be able to be part of that conversation with a CFO and be able to be adding real value. So that was a fantastic story. So from the point of view of the people who led her team, they were really happy because they could see she was much more engaged, she was bringing much more value, and she's much more likely to stay in PwC. And from Christine's perspective, she really felt like she was getting great opportunities to make a difference and engage with really, really senior people. And and these people then become evangelicals for your digital transformation program. The final story that sticks in my mind from a leadership perspective is the head of our assurance business. So that's our audit business. So he's part of our leadership team. So was very bought into digital, had signed off on it being part of our strategic objectives and all of that good stuff. So he was absolutely bought in. But I could see in real time where the actual magic happened for him. So at the beginning of our process, we had some of our audit people come in and do some training. They spent a few days learning particular skills and particular tools, and then they demoed what they'd done back to leadership. So this guy came down as part of this process. I was sitting quite close to him in the room, so I remember it really, really well. And one of the junior people got up and presented this solution that they'd built that effectively took this process that they use in that part of the business that typically takes 3 or 4 hours of an associate's time, maybe 2-3 times a month. That's a huge amount of time and adds up, and this is across multiple clients. And they distilled that process down into something like, I think it was 32 seconds, something like that. And honestly, it was like, you know, in the cartoons where you see this light bulb ping above somebody's head, I could genuinely see him having that moment where he thought, wow, this is huge for my business, because he could see that was going to free up so much time. So his junior people were going to be happier because they could all head off to the pub or the football pitch or whatever they wanted to do. But he could also see that this actually enhanced the accuracy of what we were doing. So from a regulatory perspective, it was actually a much better answer. And I know from then on, whenever he talks about digital transformation in PwC, that's the story that he shares, and that's the moment that he got really bought into it. So never underestimate the power of real human stories. So in terms of key takeaways, there's some stuff on the screen there, and I would say I'd add to that you do need a good ecosystem and you need all the technology in place. It's kind of a given. You absolutely do need leadership buy-in. It's really important, but it's also important to remember that that's not linear. Just because they're bought in doesn't mean they're passionate and doesn't mean they've had that wow moment, and that can come in time. And sometimes you need them to get there at different times as well. But I think the overall thing I would say is that digital transformation is absolutely about people. If you listen to your people, listen to their problems, and help them get the tools to solve those problems for themselves, they will do a huge amount of the work for you. I know for me in PwC, I get a real kick out of when a new solution is demoed to me. So I go to all these different events and somebody will show a solution, and I can see very clearly that the seed of that solution came from something I may have done in an academy or something we've done in further training or some other initiative that we've run. But I know that person has absolutely no awareness of that. In their mind, they've absolutely solved this problem for themselves. And that is massively, massively powerful. And lots of times I'll hear of stories just purely by chance, because people don't come and ask me, should they do this or should they do that? They just do it. And that's the real power of the transformation we've had in PwC. So just to finish off in terms of what's coming next and where I think we're going. So in PwC, we're focusing on further embedding these skills. It's a never-ending journey. We hire new people all the time and technology changes all the time. So we have to keep pushing through the process. We've probably focused a lot up until now on citizen-led innovation and leadership buy-in. We're trying to shift a little bit more to more of a team focus right now. So we've lots of teams across our business who've done great stuff, and we're trying to work with other teams across the business to replicate that and really kind of formalize and structure some of the citizen-led stuff that we've managed to do. In terms of what's next, you might have noticed during this presentation, I didn't name check any of the tools that we use. And I do that very deliberately because I am very clear that in 2-3 years' time, it's very likely that we'll be using a whole different set of tools. It's not about the tools of the technology, it's about the people and what you're trying to achieve. So I would say the things that I see that are very hot right now, automation, absolutely massive opportunities for our business and other businesses, so RPA, other types of scripting. I would say programming languages is something else that I'm starting to see quite a lot for non-technologists. So all this stuff is becoming very democratized and very open to people who are just citizen kind of developers. So I think that's something we'll see a lot more of. I would say predictive analytics, which again is becoming much more user-friendly. You don't necessarily need that data science background to do it. So I see all those things becoming more and more mainstream. Probably is important to note, and given the audience here as well, that this is the citizen-led side of things. And while normal citizens who are not tech natives are starting to be able to do more and more, there still absolutely is a place for the real experts in these fields. And what I feel what we do in PwC does is it builds everyone to this foundation level where they can do a certain amount themselves, but they know enough to be dangerous and they know to ask the experts and to ask the right questions. And that's a very key piece of it. So just to really conscious of time, because I think I've gone over, but just to leave you with this thought, I very much believe that there are 3 types of people in the world. So there are those that make things happen, there are those who watch what happens, and then there are those who wonder what happened. So my advice to you would be choose your player and choose wisely given the space that we're in. So happy to take any questions in the time we have left.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Andrea. It's really interesting. A few positive comments there in the chat, and one person had to leave early, but just saying thank you both for the really inspiring discussions. And they were both really interesting in different ways, but the common theme, it was interesting that questions was coming up in, as well for you, and just in terms of how they helped, say, in a boardroom scenario where you have, and how interactive visualizations kind of were helping to drive that. I found it really interesting. We don't have, there's no questions coming through in the chat, but if anybody would like to, maybe we could open it up, and if people want to come off mute and ask questions, that's also an option. I might just kick things off, and then we'll move into networking just in a short for the last bit of time that we have. Just from my perspective, just in terms of the people, you obviously there are the PwC staff, and then the teams in PwC, and then the clients. I'm just wondering, do you see a big kind of a variation in terms of how people, whether some people gravitate more towards the transition, I suppose, to digital on the client side and on the staff side?
Absolutely, we do. So there's always people who kind of get excited about this stuff quite naturally. And if you can hook into those people early, that can make a huge difference. And then there's kind of the middle chunk, and then there's the ones you have to drag kicking and screaming. And what I find is you have to take a different approach with each one. So with the evangelicals and people that get excited, that's really easy because you tell them stories, they see opportunities, they just grab hold of it. With the middle piece, I would say a big part of that is them not wanting to be left behind. So if you start getting people who they can relate to share a story. So what was really powerful for me when I was in tax, if I got somebody, or if I got up and presented something like this, or got somebody else to, if they look at me and they think, oh, that's Andrea from tax, she's the same qualifications as me. If she can do this, I should be able to do this. And if I can't do this, there may be something wrong with me. So that can be quite motivational for people. There's a really good phrase I heard recently that's called Irish ambition. And it's a bit like, and we see this in PwC quite a bit, most people don't want to be first, but absolutely nobody wants to be last. So it's trying to leverage that thing of, look what all these great people over here have done. We're not telling you should do it, we're just showing you what they've done. And then people in their own minds thinking, oh, actually, I need to get on this and do this. But absolutely, there's a difference between people's appetite for this kind of stuff.
Really interesting. Yeah, how you kind of the different that perspective on the people don't always want to jump to be first. Yeah, that's funny that the Irish take on things. But yeah, thanks for that. That makes sense. And there's just a question here. Let me just I'll just read through it here. So just wondering in terms of someone asking just in terms of numbers, I guess, and the initial team and what was the timeline until you had built the internal academy.
Really good question, and it actually kind of terrifies me when I think back on it now. So in terms of our team as a whole, when our team was stood up originally, there was about 7 people on the team, but they were all doing lots of different things. In terms of the academies themselves, it was literally me and one other person. And I brought the experience with me from what we'd done in tax. But honestly, when we had to turn it around for those audit guys, we had to do it really, really quickly. So it was literally 2 people working full time to pull this together. Now, what I will say we did have was we'd a rake of stories from my time in tax, and we had an absolute passion for this stuff. Like we loved it. We lived and breathed it, which I think made a big difference. But it was quite a small team. And actually, in terms of delivering it right across our business, we added 1 person to that team, I think about halfway through. And sorry, I meant to mention as well as I was talking through it, halfway through the delivery of our academy program, the world stopped for COVID and we went virtual. So in the space of 2 weeks, we turned an in-person program into a virtual program, didn't miss a beat, and managed to keep on target. And we actually hit our target of 90% of people 15 months into our program. But pretty much it was just me and my colleague Sinead who designed and delivered the whole program. So we did that for the 3,500 people in PwC, heavily supported, I should say, by the Information Lab, who are our technical training partners, and they delivered 1 day of our 2-day program. I hope that answers the question. I think I went a little bit off track.
That's great. No, thanks very much. What we might do is maybe I'll hand over to Michelle, maybe just to kind of do some closing remarks, and then other people, if there are other questions, you can hang on for the networking session and we can ask them then, if that works. So Michelle, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary and Andrea. They were fantastic talks, really inspiring. And I actually just had a question for you, Andrea, before I move on.
Sure.
Just in terms of, you were mentioning that, you know, kind of imperfect action rather than perfect inaction. But you also mentioned how regulated PwC is. So how did you find coming up with something that wasn't necessarily so perfect and in a short amount of time in that regulated environment?
Absolutely terrifying, I think, is the answer to that. And the interesting thing is, like, we are regulated in terms of what we do for our clients. So we have to make sure our accuracy and all that kind of stuff is correct. But we're not regulated in terms of how we come up with ideas and how we innovate internally. I think the challenge is it seeps into your personality. And that's why accountants aren't known to be the most innovative. So you're working with a bunch of people where by nature you're conservative and you're used to rules and regulations. And you're basically asking them to chuck all that out the window and think a little bit differently. So it could be quite challenging and absolutely terrifying, but also really exhilarating and really, really exciting. Like it's great to watch people who've never had that freedom before actually kind of blue sky things and think of new ideas and that kind of thing. So it's an interesting process, but definitely terrifying, definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing experience and process. Well done. So just to kind of wrap up, we're going to organise another one of these events for probably August. And also, I'd like to mention that if any of your companies are hiring, if you want to put it up in the chat there, I know my company Optum is hiring. There's a number of opportunities there, and there regularly is, they're always hiring. So I'll put up the link in the chat, but equally everybody is free to share their open positions there. And yeah, if you want to hang on then for there's only 6 minutes left, I think, for a little bit of networking. You're very welcome. And I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.